Are you about to give your first speech? Or maybe you've given a speech in the past, but it didn't go so well. Either way, I have you covered because in this video, I am going to break down the essential tools you need to do a great job in your next speech, whether that's for a work presentation, for a wedding, or even to inspire an audience. The first thing to understand is the why of your speech. What is the purpose of the speech you are giving, and what is the ideal outcome that you'd like? It is very different doing a business presentation than a best man speech at a wedding, so you need to know what the purpose is and what your goal is in terms of the outcome of the speech. The next step is building the structure of the speech, and I find in business presentations that numbered lists work very well. For example, you could say, here are the top 5 findings from the Q1 earnings call. Or perhaps, here are 7 essential things you need to do to take your social media presence to the next level. By having these numbered lists, it makes it easy for the audience to retain and remember the information. But when it comes to more personal speeches, such as what you might see at a wedding, I find that you might want to be a little bit more casual and inject things like personal stories. Personal stories are powerful because often they include a level of humor, and people are more likely to remember that information if it's coming from a personal story and it's enjoyable to listen to. No matter what kind of speech you're giving, I want you to try to limit your notes. And I know that's hard because many people want to write out their speech verbatim, every single word, and then stand in front of the audience and read off of a piece of paper. But the reality is those speeches aren't very engaging. And I'm going to touch on that later in the video when I talk about the importance of body language and vocal variety. But rather than standing and staring at a piece of paper, I'd much rather you build speeches with little text reminders of the next thing you're going to be talking about. So I'll break this down for you in terms of a wedding speech. Pretend you're giving a wedding speech to the groom whose name is Billy. You could write out the intro sentence fully so you have it as a crutch, but I don't want you to read that sentence. I want you to commit it to memory, and I want you to start off with that powerful introduction. Don't panic. If you forget what it is, you have it written down, but you will have practiced enough so you don't need to read that out. The next thing you might have in your notes is something that triggers your memory, such as tell the story about Billy in 5th grade. If this is a story you're familiar with, you've probably told it to friends and family many times before, so now it's easy to remember. You've got your intro sentence, which is powerful, which is going to hook the audience, and then a reminder to tell a story that you're already familiar with. You don't need to write down all the details of the story. You've already told this story before, so it's simply a prompt to remind you to bring up that story. Next in your notes, you could have a couple of key words such as loyalty, patience, creativity. Maybe these are the 3 attributes about Billy that you find very admirable, and these words will remind you to give examples of why Billy is a loyal person, why he's a patient person, and why he has a level of creativity. Underneath that, you might have a little sentence that says, great things about Sarah. Perhaps Billy is marrying a woman named Sarah, and you want to say some kind words about her. So again, you can have a few words that will prompt your memory, but rather than standing there reading off of a piece of paper, you see that little prompt and it reminds you what you've already practiced, what you're going to talk about. Then you have your concluding sentence written out verbatim, again as a crutch so that you remember exactly what you're going to say, but I want you to commit the intro and the conclusion to memory. I know all the information I just gave you is a lot, so this point is perhaps the most important thing I will say all video. Give yourself enough time to practice. Practice is so incredibly important when it comes to public speaking because the reality is when you stand in front of an audience, it is a terrifying thing. Many people believe public speaking is one of the greatest fears there is in life, and you're going to have enough to worry about when you're stood in front of an audience. You want the speech to feel as natural as possible. So I want you to practice. I can't stress it enough, because all of these things that you're worried about, the structure, body language, vocal tone, these things will become easier the more times you've gone through the speech, the more you've memorized what you want to say, and then you can focus about really connecting with the audience, and you're not so worried about the content of the speech because you have that dialed in. There are many ways to practice. You can record yourself giving the speech. That is one way. You can ask a friend or a family member who maybe you don't want to spoil the excitement of the actual day of speech, but maybe they can give you some feedback directly. Toward the end of this video, I'm going to give you a couple extra ways that you can get in extra practice. But often I practice by myself out loud in rooms in my home, and my wife thinks I'm crazy sometimes. But this helps me visualize and prepare for giving a speech. I pretend that I can see the audience out in the crowd, and I deliver the speech just as I would on the day of. And often that practice has gone a long way in helping me deliver a great speech. My next tip is to focus on the beginning of your speech, because let's face it, there are so many wedding speeches out there that set the bar really low. They all start with, "Hi everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Wade Patterson, and I am the best man in this wedding." So many speeches start that way. You have an opportunity by just adding a sprinkle of creativity to instantly become a more memorable speech than most of the speeches that will be given at that wedding. Using the Billy wedding example from earlier, you could start your speech with something like this. "Many people assume that Billy and I have been lifelong friends, but the truth is, there was a brief moment in time in 5th grade where we were arch enemies." That type of introduction catches the audience's attention. You've hooked them. The audience is wondering, wait a second, I thought Wade and Billy were great friends. What happened in 5th grade? There's a story here. There's something interesting that's coming, and I want to pay attention. But powerful openings don't have to be limited to wedding speeches. You can have a powerful opening with an inspirational speech or even a business presentation. One example of this, I recently gave a talk at my own work, and I opened the speech by asking the question, "Are we a modern brand?" And then I stood there and I watched the audience, and you could see the wheels turning in their heads. They started to think about the question I had asked and really put some thought behind, are we? Are we a modern brand? Then in my speech, I outlined data and consumer research we had done that outlined how consumers feel about the advertisements and the marketing we have out in the marketplace. To finish my speech, I concluded by, again, reiterating the data that we had and then proving the point of, are we a modern brand? Yeah. We are. According to this consumer data, consumers find our brand to be incredibly modern. That unique approach to the speech really grasped the business audience, and they weren't expecting that. They were expecting your typical business presentation with slideshows with too much text on the screen, but instead I was able to add a little bit of creativity, and the message resonated on a deeper level. One of the most important tips for new speakers, for beginners who want to take on public speaking, is dealing with nerves. Stress and anxiety is incredibly normal and can be expected when public speaking. I mentioned earlier, public speaking is one of the greatest fears that anybody has. In some surveys, they say it's bigger than the fear of death, which is absolutely insane to think about, but you can expect that you will have at least some level of nerves before you give a speech, and you should. If you think about it, when you give a presentation to an audience, there are many people giving their valuable attention to you. These might be successful business people, these might be parents, whatever or whomever is in the audience, their time is valuable. Therefore, there's a lot of pressure on you as the speaker to provide them with value, to make them think, hey, that was time well spent. And that pressure can be all-consuming for some people, but there's a few ways you can really help deal with the nerves. One is what I already mentioned, and that is practicing. The more you practice speaking, I promise you, the anxiety will reduce because it becomes a more natural part of your process, especially if you are part of a club like Toastmasters. Toastmasters encourages you to practice on a regular basis in front of a group of people, and this can help reduce your fear. Another thing that's really powerful is injecting humor into your speech. When you are on stage and you make the audience laugh and you hear that laughter, it is the most relaxing and powerful thing because you know the audience is enjoying themselves in that moment. And that laughter almost adds to the high of public speaking because it goes from being something scary to being something incredibly enjoyable, because now not only are you not wasting people's time, you have the proof that they were enjoying seeing you on stage and that you are giving them something extra. Try to use humor, whether it's a business presentation or especially if it's a speech at a wedding, which people expect will have some level of humor anyways. It's going to help relax your audience and it's going to relax you as the speaker. A couple other things you can do to help with the nerves. Try to go to the front of the stage before anyone's there. And I know that might sound a little bit strange. If you're at a wedding, if you get to the reception early before some of the other tables, just take a moment and stand near the front where you're going to be giving your speech. Nobody needs to know what you're doing, but just look out and see the tables and start to think through and visualize yourself giving the speech. That way, when you are actually called up to go and give the speech, you've already stood in that place, you've already started the visualization process, and it's going to reduce a little bit of stress. The next thing is to bring a glass of water with you. I can't tell you how many times speakers are caught off guard because their mouths get very dry, and all of a sudden they can hear themselves with that sticking of the mouth as they open their mouth to speak. And that is something that you want to be proactive with. Therefore, if you have water on the stage, nobody will find it odd if between sentences you take a quick sip. It will look completely normal, but I drink a ton of water before my speech and even during the speech as well. It really helps me and it eliminates that dry mouth issue. The next thing you can do is focus on your breathing or maybe even implement some meditation. For myself, box breathing has worked really well. So breathing in, inhaling for 4 seconds, then holding my breath for 4 seconds, then exhaling for 4 seconds, and holding for 4 seconds. And you think of it as this 4-second box where you do each of those activities. It helps to calm yourself down, to relax, to control your breathing. And doing little things like that, I have personally found go a long way in reducing my nerves. So now that your nerves are as settled as possible, you're invited up to deliver this presentation, whether it be a business presentation, an inspirational speech, or perhaps a humorous or entertaining wedding speech. You want to incorporate body language and vocal tone and variety. And the reason you want to do this is that there are these 3 magical numbers that represent communication. Those numbers are 55, 38, and 7. And each of these represents the percentage breakdown of how a message is communicated. So the 55 represents 55% being body language. The 38, that represents the vocal tone and variety, and only 7% of a message has to do with the actual words we speak, which is powerful because if we do the math, that's 93% of communication has to do with body language and vocal tone and variety. The example I always give, I could say the same words in 2 different ways and they mean completely different things. As an example, I am so excited to be here today to be shooting this video. I love producing this YouTube content for you. I'm so excited to be putting this video together, another YouTube video. Woohoo! I love doing this video content more than anything in the world. It's awesome. Essentially, in those two messages, the words were very similar, but they had two completely different meanings. The first one, I was genuine. You knew that I actually enjoyed creating this video content. In the second, you could see that there was a level of sarcasm, that I wasn't as serious about it. And that is why body language is so important. If you are stood reading words off of a sheet of paper, your vocal tone is going to be monotone, and you are limited to do body language because your hands are tied up, your eyes are focused. Instead, you want those notes, if any, because ideally you won't have notes, but if you do have notes, you want to set them to the side. Those are your crutch if you need to use them. And otherwise, you can use your hands, you can look, you can make eye contact with all of the people in the audience. That is going to draw them in, and using that body language is going to help them connect to your message on a deeper level. If you're using slides, keep them simple. One of the biggest mistakes I see with slideshow presentations is people have too many words on the slides, and often the words are in much too small a font to actually read for people with poor eyesight like myself. Try to limit those words, maybe 3 or 4 words per slide, or better yet, only pictures, or maybe even just videos, but something behind that is a visual. And what is great is that this can almost act as a way of notes for yourself. If you have a PowerPoint presentation and you have images that are representing what you're talking about, by seeing or glancing at the next slide, it will trigger your memory of what you're supposed to talk about without you reading any notes. So as an example, maybe that 5th grade story I wanted to talk about Billy, if I was using slideshow for this, maybe it's a photo of Billy in 5th grade, myself and Billy, 5th grade pals, and I see that image, boom, I'm automatically triggered to talk about my friendship or when I was enemies with Billy back in 5th grade. An image can help trigger our memory. The other mistake I see people make when they have PowerPoint presentations is that they continually look back at their slide while they're talking if it's being projected behind them. And my tip in this situation is to have another laptop in front of you, perhaps on a table, that is mirroring what the slides are showing behind you. That way, as you're talking to your audience, you can quickly look down and you can see exactly what they're seeing, and you're not turning your back to them as you're giving your presentation. My final public speaking tip for beginners is to have a memorable closing. For business presentations, often this can be done with the recap, especially if you used a numbered list. In the example of the top 5 findings from the quarterly earnings call, you could do a quick recap. In summary, here are the 5 things we need to remember. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You list out all of those and you cap it off that way. But a very powerful way, one of my favorite ways to end any speech, and this can work for business speeches or personal speeches, is to make the speech come full circle. What I mean by that, using the example I used earlier, the business presentation I gave, I opened the speech by saying, "Are we a modern brand?" I then filled the speech by giving consumer data and information that pointed toward the direction of, yes, we are a very modern brand. So to conclude, I asked the same question. Are we a modern brand? Given all of the information we have at this point in time, the answer is a resounding yes. And that is how I closed my speech. And I can tell you that if you include this type of creativity in a business presentation, your colleagues are probably going to take notice, because most speeches, especially when it comes to professional or business, they're sort of cookie cutter and they're predictable and they're usually data heavy and not creative or interesting. So if you can catch the audience's attention, you really have an opportunity to engage them in a powerful way. And this can go for personal speeches as well, or inspirational speeches. Giving the Billy wedding example, I started that off by saying, everyone assumed Billy and I have been the best of friends throughout our entire lives. But there was a brief stint in 5th grade where Billy and I were arch enemies. Then I go through this speech, probably telling a great story about 5th grade, talking about why Billy and I are such great friends, perhaps mentioning Billy's partner whom he's about to marry, and then at the end, I could circle back. So even though Billy and I had a brief moment of being enemies, our friendship has endured and will continue to endure over the years, or something like that. That way, the audience feels as though this was all planned from the beginning. You took them on a journey, but you had the destination sorted out, and that was right back at the start. Just how you opened the speech, you wrapped it up, you tied a bow on it, and it's a beautiful way to close out any speech. I hope these videos gave you some great ideas to take on your first speech or to do even better on your next speech than you've done in the past. Let me know in the comment section what was helpful. What has your experience been with speaking? If this is your first time landing on one of my videos, please consider subscribing to my channel. It's my goal to help make you a better public speaker, a more impactful communicator. Turn on those notifications so you never miss a video. And thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I'll catch you on the next one.